Right, that's great. Members, do you have any interest to declare? Do you want to ask anybody individually, Chris, or?
Nope, if anyone's got any interest to declare, they can put their hand up.
All right, that's great. We move on then to item 3, the minutes of the last meeting. Anybody got anything they'd like to raise for anything from their minutes? Are we all happy with the minutes that were there? Great, that's fine. Thank you very much. We then move on to item 4, which is the workload. Would you like to give your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. And if someone can confirm that they can see that, lovely. Thank you very much.
No.
So the purpose of the first report for General Licensing Committee today is to update members of the General Licensing Committee on the work undertaken by the team during Q1 of the 23-24 report. The work of the licensing team in relation to General Licensing Committee covers the following areas: Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing, scrap metal, charity collections, street trading, smoke-free legislation, animal establishment licensing and sex establishment licensing. In relation to Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Licensing, during the reporting period, 20 complaints have been received in relation to the function and have been dealt with by licensing officers. Various complaints have been received, including allegations that licensed vehicles are not displaying the required roof lights in terms of Hackney carriages, parking issues, exceeding the number of permitted passengers to be carried, and allegations of drivers exceeding speed limits. 2 complaints were also received during the reporting period that vehicles have been operating for hire and reward without being licensed. Further investigations have been carried out and advice provided accordingly. During the reporting period, the team received information that an unlicensed driver had been seen driving a licensed vehicle. The investigation is ongoing and the committee will be updated when the matter is concluded. There have been 2 multi-agency operations that have taken place with officers from the licensing team and both Heathley Gwent Police and the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. A total of 18 licensed vehicles were stopped over the course of the 2 operations, and issues identified included drivers not wearing their identification badge, lack of no smoking signage, and written required daily records not being available. 2 drivers were also given advice about cleanliness of their vehicles. During the second multi-agency operation, 1 delayed prohibition was issued by officers from the DVSA in relation to brake pads on a vehicle, and 1 immediate prohibition was issued for a vehicle having 2 defective tyres. The driver was issued with an on-the-spot fine for £100 and 3 DVLA penalty points added to his licence. During the last committee, members were asked to provide comments on the Welsh Government's White Paper entitled Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle PHV Wales Bill. The comments that members provided formed part of the consultation response that was submitted on behalf of the Council, and members will be updated in due course as to the outcome. There have been 4 separate issues that have been dealt with by means of strategic decision delegated decision in Q1 of the period. 1 driver's licence was suspended with immediate effect due to non-compliance of the requirement to provide a 6-month DBS certificate as required by the Council's policy. The Strategic Director also considered the review of a Hackney Carriage and Private Hire driver's licence following an allegation made to the police of inappropriate behaviour. The decision was to suspend the licence with immediate effect in the interest of public safety. In relation to scrap metal, there have been 2 complaints received related to unlicensed scrap metal collectors operating in the borough. Advice has been given accordingly, and officers are liaising with a neighbouring authority following information received that an unlicensed scrap metal dealer may be operating in the borough without the required authorisation. In relation to street trading, officers from the team have dealt with 6 complaints relating to this function during the period. 4 complaints were received in relation to unlicensed traders. 2 warning letters have been issued, and one of the traders has since applied for and been granted a street trading consent. The committee was informed at the last meeting that an investigation was ongoing in relation to a trader operating in the borough without the required consent. After a full and detailed investigation, the decision was made to prosecute for trading without the consent, and the matter is subject to court proceedings. I can update members that this matter was heard in Magistrates Court this morning. The trader pleaded guilty to trading without a consent. He was issued with a £120 fine, which was originally £180 but was reduced to £120 following an early guilty plea, £48 victim surcharge, and £100 of cost was awarded to the council. An investigation continues in relation to another unlicensed trader who has traded in the borough on a number of occasions and who has previously been issued with a written warning. Further details cannot be given at this time as the matter is still under investigation, and an update will be provided in due course. There's been 1 complaint in relation to an allegation that a licensed Hackney carriage and private hire driver had been seen smoking in his licensed private hire vehicle. A fixed penalty notice for smoking in a smoke-free premises has been issued and has been paid for. In terms of animal establishment licensing, during Q1, the team has received 3 complaints in relation to animal establishment licensing. 1 complaint alleged that unlicensed boarding was taking place. The person had an application pending with the authority, and the applicant was advised that boarding prior to a licence application could impact on the outcome of the licence determination. The 2nd complaint received raised concerns about the welfare conditions of animals. The type of premises to which the complaint related is a premises type that is not currently regulated by local authorities, so the concerns raised were passed to the RSPCA for investigation. 1 complaint has been received in relation to illegal dog breeding. Officers have investigated, made contact with the alleged breeder, who has now applied for a licence to breed. Section 4.9 of the report just gives an overview of animal health and welfare. As members have been previously advised, this was a function that was brought back in-house to licensing and trading standards and has been with the team since July 2022, following the Council's service level agreement with Powys Council ending. The team have dealt with 3 complaints which fall under this banner of animal health and welfare, and the team continued to liaise with relevant partners in order to investigate the complaints. At Appendix A of the report, you will see the workload activities undertaken by the team for Q1. Officers have started a planned programme of inspections which will assist the team on meeting the set targets for the year. It is therefore recommended that the Licensing Committee note and comment on the contents of the report and note the activity report for April 23 to June 23. Thank you, Chair. That's my report.
Before I go any further, I forgot to say that we welcome the use of the Welsh language in meetings, and I've had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. I should have said that first. Sorry about that. Has any members got any questions for Claire they'd like to ask from that report? Councillor Davis.
I just want to thank her for a very thorough report. She's been really busy and good along with the team, and it's very good. Well done, yeah. It's a real good report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Councillor Parish, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. 4.1.1, 20 complaints. Is that more than the usual number of complaints that you usually get?
Thank you, Councillor Parish. Sorry, was that 4.1.1 of the report?
Yes, yes.
Private hire licensing. Unfortunately, I haven't got the figures with me at the moment to compare year on year.
Yeah.
about 20 complaints is probably a standard for each quarter. Unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive because I haven't got those figures, but we do receive a high number of complaints each quarter.
Oh, right, thank you. Can I ask something else too, Chairman?
Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned Appendix 1, alcohol and entertainment, 23 inspections and 20 defects found. Now that sounds high to me.
Thank you, Councillor Parish. So with the inspections, the officers from the team have a checklist. So they go out and they ensure that what's on the checklist is being adhered to. So these defects could be, for instance, not having a licence on display or not having a required signage. I agree with what you said. It is high. Any defects that are found, officers will advise and will follow up in writing. Where necessary, a revisit will be undertaken to ensure that those defects have been rectified. But yeah, 20 defects is a lot. It might not necessarily mean some premises could have more defects than others. So we don't drill down into one premise had this amount of defects for committee. So that could be 20 defects found over 23 premises, or it could be 20 defects found over 4 premises.
Right, thank you, Claire, for that.
Thank you, Councillor Parish.
Right, would you like to go on to item 5, the consideration of review of the council's policy on the administration and regulation of acne carriage and private eye licences?
Sorry, Councillor Evans, before we move on,
right,
could we just go through the recommendations?
Sorry, yeah, I didn't know whether you want to do the recommendation
if we could
altogether.
do it per report, that would be great. Thank you.
Right. The recommendation is that the licensing committee note and comment on the contents of this report and note the activity report for April 2023 to June 2023. Are members happy to accept that? Anybody against? Yeah. Anybody abstaining? No. So there we are, that's carried.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. And then, yeah, happy to move on to the next report.
Right, if you want to move on, I thought you probably want to do all the recommendations together. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm presenting the second report regarding the taxi policy, so I'll just share my screen. So hopefully that'll be coming up. I don't intend to read through the report in detail, but just summarise as it has been circulated in advance. So this report relates to 2 aspects of the Council's policy and administration and regulation of hackney carriage and private licences. The first part of the report refers to Appendix F for the policy, which is the Council's current approach to the use of the National Register of Taxi Licence Refusals and Revocations, or NR3. The register was set up for local authorities to record their decisions to refuse or revoke a hackney carriage or private hire driver or operator licence. And where such a decision is made, the licence holder's name, address, date of birth, driving licence number and national insurance number is entered onto the register, along with the decision that's been made. Then, if another local authority is considering an application for a new licence or to renew an existing one, a search can be made at the register for the applicant, and if there is a match, the decision made will be shown, but the reason for the decision aren't given. So contact would then be made with the local authority that made the decision to find out the reasons for them making the decision. It could be that the decision is based on complaints or local intelligence that wouldn't necessarily be accessible via other means. Such information wouldn't necessarily come up on a DBS check. So it's a highly useful information sharing platform that is intended to safeguard the public. The shared information can then be used in determining if the applicant is a fit and proper person who may be granted a licence to drive vehicles or to operate vehicles. In July 2020, the Department for Transport published a recommendation within the statutory standards for private hire, for taxi and private hire licensing, that local authorities use the register. And then that was followed in March 21 by the Welsh Government giving the same recommendation to the Welsh local authorities. And there is an expectation that all local authorities will comply with the recommendations unless there are exceptional reasons for doing so, or for not doing so, I should say. In Torfaen, we have been using the register since July 2019, so we were already complying with the recommendations when they were published. In April this year, so April 2023, the register was expanded to include the recording of decisions to suspend licences and is now the National Register of Licence Refusals, Revocations and Suspensions, NR3S. So a licence may be suspended due to ongoing investigations or for things like non-compliance with licensing conditions, which again may assist another local authority in deciding if an applicant is a fit and proper person, but that information may not be available other than via the NR3S register. English local authorities have been legally obligated to use the expanded register since April 23, but the same requirement doesn't currently apply in Wales. So our use of the expanded register to record suspensions is optional. The committee is therefore being asked if a draft revision of Appendix F of the current taxi policy, which has been attached to the report as Appendix 1, with inclusion of references to the recording of suspensions of licences on the NR3S, should be prepared for the committee to consider at a future meeting. And if a draft were to be prepared, it would be subject to consultation with the taxi trade and general public after approval by committee. The second... report refers to a request that has been received from the taxi trade for the council to review its policies on the seating configuration of larger hackney carriages and private hire vehicles that have 2 rows of seats in the rear of the vehicle. So the current policies require that the seating configurations have to be such that no seat can be tilted or moved in order to access the rear row of seats. That may mean that a seat has to be permanently removed in order to allow unimpeded access to the rear seats, or the seating set up in a conference style with the 2 rows of seats facing each other. This has been the Council's policy since at least January 2013 and is intended to allow a quick exit from a vehicle if, for example, the vehicle were involved in an accident without passengers having to work out how a mechanism for moving a seat works. But also where a seat is tipped forward in a vehicle, there can be a relatively small gap for passengers to get through in order to access the rear seats compared with a vehicle where the seat was removed entirely. Where a seat is tilted in order to access the rear row of seats, that it may not be suitable for all passengers or groups of passengers who hire larger vehicles. These policies are local, so it's Torvine's current policy. The taxi trade have noted that other local authorities do not have the same restriction. The trade have also made reference to the council's own vehicles that don't comply with this requirement. But after discussions with our transport department, they've advised that for their larger vehicles, the doors open sufficiently wide so the passengers in both rows of seats can directly access a door without having to move a seat. So it's not quite the same setup as with the taxis. But if somebody were to present a vehicle for licensing that had 2 doors in the rear that open sufficiently wide to allow access to both rows of seats, that would be acceptable in the course of the policy, so it could be licensed. The committee considered a similar request from the taxi trade in July 21 to give more options for the types of vehicles that the council would license to carry 5 or more passengers, but the committee decided to reject the request then, and the policy wasn't reviewed, and there was no consultation. It should also be noted that the current policy doesn't feather the discretion of the council, so if an application were to be made to license a vehicle that didn't comply with the seating configurations, it would be considered on its merits. So the policy doesn't bar anyone making an application contrary to the policy. So in respect to the second part of the report, the committee is being asked, again, if a draft revision of this current seating configuration policy should be prepared for consideration at a future meeting. If the committee approved a draft policy, it will be subject to consultation with the taxi trade and other stakeholders to understand if there are reasons for varying the policies and or concerns about doing so. So we'll now just move to the recommendations for this report, which are in section 8. So the recommendations are that the committee resolve 1, that a draft revision of Appendix F of the Council's policy on the administration and regulation of hackney carriage and private hire licences, with reference to the suspension of drivers' licences included, should be prepared for consideration at a future meeting and approval for consultation with the taxi trade and other parties. And secondly, that draft revision of the seating configuration policies for vehicles with 2 rows of seats in the rear, as set out in the Council's policy on the administration and regulation of hackney carriage and private hire licences, should be prepared for consideration at a future meeting and then approval given for consultation with the taxi trade and other relevant parties. Okay, that's the report.
So, any members happy to endorse the recommendations, or anybody got any questions they would like to ask Robin? before that? No? Are we all in agreement with the recommendations that Robin had just said? Anybody against? Anybody abstain? That's great, thank you for that. That's carried through, thank you. Have we got a date for the next meeting? Anybody?
Yes, Chair, the date of the next meeting is the 16th of November.
Everybody hear that, 8th of November, the next meeting. So that's the end of that meeting. And the next meeting will start at 2:30 for the Statutory Licensing Committee. Okay? So time to go and have a quick break.